So, welcome everybody to today's session of the Teachers Lounge. Today, we are joined by Professor Nathan Grawe from Carleton College, who's going to help us dig in a little bit deeper about the use of AI in education, particularly beyond K to 12.
Hi, everyone. We wanted to continue our conversation about AI. A couple weeks ago, we had an extraordinary conversation about ChatGPT and the uses in different kinds of education and the things that we learned about it. Jamal, you were so eye-opening in that conversation. So thank you for adding to that and then, continuing to come and add to that conversation. Last week, we had an excellent conversation about the different labels in education and how we can get around them to open up what true learning is to students instead of fighting over divisive labels. And Simon was here for that. And Simon works up in the Berkshires. He works very closely with Carleton College. And he said, you have to meet Professor Grawe. He's doing amazing things in his classroom. He's doing amazing work. And he has incredible insights from higher ed, which is not where we specialize. So we would love to hear about what you are doing, about how higher ed is adapting to this technology and new ways of working that is preparing our students for the future.
Sure. Well, I'm not so sure about incredible things just yet because this is all so new to all of us. But we certainly are having conversations as a faculty about the new technology and what it means. And obviously there are important questions around academic honesty and things like that. But at the same time, we don't want to just focus on how AI could be a threat, but to see how it can be leveraged. Clearly, it's going to be a part of our future. And so we've been trying to think creatively about how we can help our students begin to think about where it's useful, where it's not useful, where they might be able to tap into it, where they should be a little bit skeptical of the output from a bot, at least as it's currently configured, but probably as forever as it is likely to be configured. So, this term, obviously this is all new, but I'm working with my students to try to figure out how might we use text bots and artificial intelligence in the future to aid writing. I've got an assignment where I'm having students work with a draft of a paper where the ChatGPT bot has drafted the paper, and then their job then is to revise from there. And looking at the draft, there's some technical things in economics that the AI gets wrong, which isn't terribly surprising because a lot of people use this technical language incorrectly, and so what gets fed into the bot then comes out the other end. And in addition, I think there's some real limitations to how the bot argues or doesn't really argue. It's not the learning model, as I understand it right now, is not really about thinking. It's more about predictive language. And so that predictably plays out in some ways that I think my students are recognizing. And so my goal is to get them into contact with the output from ChatGPT and to begin thinking about which skills just became radically more plentiful in the world. Probably not a skill I want to specialize in because that's not needed anymore. But for everything that just became relatively more plentiful, other skills became relatively less plentiful. And if we can figure out what those things are, what our comparative advantage is as intelligent human beings, then we can really tap into learning more about doing those things that the computer can't do for us so that the final product is so much better.
I think there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. The most amazing thing to me is that you jumped in and you're having your students try to help you figure out how to use it instead of just shying away and saying, no, don't use it. You can't. And focus on all of the things that jumps out at everybody, the cheating possibilities, if you call it that, and that kind of thing.
Right.
But just, okay, this thing is here. Let's see what it can do. Let's try to break it. Let's try to figure out how we're going to use it. I also think that might lend itself to like the question that we always like to ask people when we have them on, like, what is the true purpose of education and how you even framed that by working with your students. Do you think, well, first, what do you think the purpose of education is? And what you just did, what you just described, how you're doing it with your students, does it lend itself to answering that question? Is that the embodiment of what you think the purpose of education is?
Yeah, so I'm going to be, I'm going to show my liberal arts nerd here. So, my view on education is that I'm trying to liberate my students to grapple with both enduring and novel questions. So enduring questions are enduring in part because they're multifaceted. So coming up with new ways of thinking and multiple ways of asking questions and multiple forms of evidence are going to be necessary for that. But I think the same thing is necessary when confronting novel problems in the future. Novel problems don't come to us wrapped in disciplinary wrappers that says, oh, this is an economics problem. At least not usually. Sometimes they do. But even when they do, I think you need to figure out, how do I approach this new thing? And so from my perspective, the ChatGPT issue is just, right up the alley of what I'm trying to prepare my students to do. Here comes this new thing. How do you live in a world where simply generating large masses of text, which frankly my students at Carleton are pretty good at. So that's a skill set that I have, that they have, that's frankly pretty highly rewarded. People think it's pretty impressive how quickly I can crank out text. Well, I think my ability to impress people that way just went through the floor. Nobody cares about generating gobs of text. So what else can I bring to the table to take this text generator and put it to good purposes for me? It seems to me a liberal artsy type problem. Now, I would say not every writing assignment should be of the type I just described. In fact, the writing assignment that I have has two parts. And the second part has to do with using quantitative evidence drawn from some particular sources to back up your argument. And ChatGPT, as it's currently constructed, cannot answer that question. And when I posed the question, it basically said, yeah, that's not, I can't do that. So there's still going to be a role for us to learn how to draft, to be text generators in essence. So I still think we need to help students learn those skills as well. But to stick my head in the sand and pretend that this new tool doesn't exist, and not to engage my students with the question of how do we really lean into our comparative advantages, so that maybe what had been a business memo that took me an hour to craft now takes me a half an hour. But it's twice as good, because in 5 minutes, I had a really great working draft. And now it was just a matter of tightening some things up, adding some detail, maybe adding an argument chatbot missed. We'd be foolish not to take advantage of it, given that we're moving toward a new world. So a new world with new questions.
I love that. And, my background, I was a history major, history and poli-sci. So my superhero power is generating large amounts of text as well.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling this a lot, because, you get good at that, especially in a liberal arts college. That's what you get good at, because you can mass produce you get used to writing those kinds of papers. Yeah. But now you're having to work on and refine different skills. But those skills are kind of more multifaceted and purposeful than just being able to explain yourself in 20 pages as well.
Right.
It's the analysis, it's the evaluation, it's those tough synthesis words. Yep. That are very hard to teach, and often kind of, and not intentionally, but kind of get pushed aside, because when you're having to work through, you're teaching a survey course, or you're teaching your blanket course, it's so much content, you don't have time for the analysis, or there has to be your standards for your department, or that there has to be multiple papers in a semester. Those kinds of high level skills, because they're harder to reach, kind of get pushed out of the way, because of all the things that you're trying to meet. Now, if ChatGPT is loading in that information, it gives us the chance in class to really demonstrate and scaffold and really teach those higher level skills. That must be really important in economics. That is not a field that you go through and kind of loft your way through.
Right. Well, I think the technical matter that we do in economics might not be approximated as quickly by the bot, though obviously we're going to be seeing connections between ChatGPT and things like Wolfram Alpha very shortly, where some of the quantitative questions that ChatGPT struggles with, it will no longer struggle with. But the analysis that you're talking about, like those connector words, aren't just trivial things. It's the thing that makes the argument. It's the thing that makes the meaning out of the string of facts. And I think it's going to be very difficult ChatGPT will never do a great job, never ever, at approximating my thinking. It may make interesting arguments, but they won't be my arguments. And so there's always going to be the necessity for me to look at the output and to think, yeah, but what do I want to make of this fact set? Maybe it did learn how to use connector words in really powerful ways, but they're not my connector words, and it's not the meaning I'm trying to make. Not to mention that it's going to struggle coming up with truly novel ideas, because by definition, it can only put out something like what comes in. I mean, it can no doubt learn to extend a little bit beyond, but when we think about some of the real breakthroughs in human thinking, they are the ideas that really come out of left field. Mm-hmm. And I think it's kind of exciting to think about a world where the chatbot can help me articulate the straightforward stuff that quote unquote everybody knows. And then I can spend most of my energy really trying to figure out, but what, I've got this kernel of a novel idea, but I'm not sure I've quite nailed it. I can put all my writing energy and thinking energy into, okay, but what am I trying to say? What's my novel contribution? And that is, after all, where the real contribution for me comes from. I've written papers where it's been revised a bunch of times because referees have said, oh, try it this way. And, you go through that process and you end up having to rewrite a lot of, say, the lit review. I wasn't necessarily adding new content there. I was just, reframing some existing content. If you looked at the 6 different versions of the paper, I think, they're all kind of the same versions, or they're different versions of the same thing. That wasn't where my novel contribution was at. It's not that it was unimportant. Again, the connector words and how I framed things mattered. So I'm not saying the chatbot is likely to just stand alone in any time in the near-term future. But there is a lot of writing that, once you've learned how to do it, is not the crux of where the work is at. And I think we all know that because there are parts of our writing that we just bang out, but it still takes a lot of time. And then there are other parts where, I go and I take a walk for a while and I ask myself, well, what are you trying to say? Because I really am stuck. And that's then where I can spend more of my time thinking.
This is reminding me. Oh, I'm sorry, Roz.
No, it's almost like you're describing that ChatGPT and other AI tools that are going to come after it are almost forcing us as educators and then the students to do what we know we should be doing or striving for in the classroom, is like helping the students find their own voice. So we're getting the hard part out of the way. Okay, here's the content. And instead of us trying to pour it into their heads, which does not work, we all know that, ChatGPT is making them feel like it's giving them that first sense of success. Okay, this is what you wanted to say. Does this sound right? And now as educators, we can say, okay, great. Now you have this great foundation. Do you feel good? This is your first win. Now I'm going to challenge you to raise the bar. And now that you have that first edit done, now I'm going to challenge you to change the bar even more. And like how you said, go take a walk, go to the beach, get away from it. And now, is this really what you really want to say? And so it's like this thing that scares a lot of people at first is almost the blessing in disguise of getting us where we want to go.
Yeah, and I think to get where where you're describing we want to go is going to require some pretty savvy writing, though it might be in 2 and 3 sentence chunks, right? How do I prompt the chatbot? I've certainly had the experience working with it and like, well, I see what you're doing there, and I see how you view that as the response to my question. But I was thinking something else. So now how do I need to lead you? And there are going to be times when I say, I can't lead you, and I'm going to have learned how to generate text myself. So I don't think it relieves us of the need to teach students how to, as early writers, for instance, craft a 5-paragraph essay to see, hey, there's structure here. But it will allow us maybe to move on once the students understand the rudimentary practice of that. And I think it does level the playing field, because I certainly see students who, whether because of temperament or maybe resources in their K-12 system or however they get to be age 18, they are less capable. They've got some idea of how to craft some text, but they're less capable at that. And I think in a lot of applications in the future, that's going to make a lot less difference. If these young people can think savvy thoughts and be really good revisers of existing text, the fact that they didn't write the first draft, I think, is going to matter less. And so it's a little bit of both and. I think you will need to know how to draft stuff, but that will be less important to your success as a writer in the future, because the bot can draft a lot of things.
Yeah. So I was going to say, this reminds me of the book Range by David Epstein, where it's about where the premise is that you don't want to be specialized, is that you want a range of skills and a range of knowledge, because when you become an expert, you kind of have blinders on and you're not able to see outside of your field of expertise. And that real innovation comes from the novel connections between random pieces of information that you never thought were supposed to come together.
Right.
So it's, having that broad knowledge base. And what ChatGPT will allow now, and you sparked this in my brain from your saying of that, it's combing the internet, it's combing its inputs, and it's giving you information, but it's never going to make those novel connections. But it will allow us to jump to those novel connections maybe a little bit quicker. Right. Is that when I'm having ideas and I'm inputting, it's going to start feeding me things. It's not going to make the connection because it doesn't have that capability, but the human brain has that ability to get to that novel connection and create that spark of innovation, and being able to access that information faster and have it pulled together faster as your brain starts chugging through the questions, being able to put them in and have it processing out this information is going to allow your brain to kind of skip a couple steps to get to the innovative part. So really it's teaching kids the prompt, it's teaching kids the analysis, but then it really gets to that core of, this is what we tell kids all the time. This is what we tell kids in our classroom, no matter what age they are. Like, don't you want to be an entrepreneur? Don't you want to, think of the next thing? Don't you want to be the spark? Well, now we have a tool that we can embrace and teach them that helps them get to those steps, so that they're getting to those higher level steps. They're able to start to bridge those connections and really jump ahead instead of spending all that time building up that broad base knowledge, which is necessary. I'm not dismissing, but just helping get through all the process.
Right.
Go ahead, Rose.
No. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to change the subject, so you go ahead.
No, I probably was too. I was just going to ask I'll ask mine and then go back to your point, because this is for later. Yeah. We're talking about how AI and those tools allow students to jump ahead, right? And I know, especially for us, Jessica and I, like K-12 kind of educators and stuff like that, there's always this thing looming over our head that we have to get to a certain point. Even if you're in an independent school and they say, oh, no, you don't have to get to a certain point. You do. You need to get to a certain point. So I know with this, what I'm automatically thinking is, wow, now the brakes can really come off, because like how you guys are saying, those students will get to that foundational level a little bit faster. And now how much more can I cover? Do you have that similar kind of feeling in your courses in, college?
Yeah, not yet, because I'm teaching how to model and think like an economist. And so that's a technical skill that the bot can't help them do. On the paper, I think it is interesting to think about how it's going to change. I don't know yet, but I think it's going to change the way I teach writing. And in the past, I would get a student who really struggled maybe with basic organization. And when I provided comments on that student's paper, almost inevitably, I felt like, look, you can only provide 2 or 3 comments that the student can grapple with. And clearly understanding that you need topic sentences is at the top of that list. So that's all we can talk about. I really can't work with you on deeper thoughts downstream from that until you can craft a paper where I can follow what the heck you're saying. Mm-hmm. And now I think we will be able to kind of multitask with such students. On one hand, we'll have assignments where they have to do drafting themselves, and we can work on that. But we don't have to frustrate them by saying, and yet another assignment where all I'm going to talk to you about is topic sentences. And we are never going to get on to word choice or voice or anything like that, because we're just working on those topic sentences, which darn it, you still don't know how to do. And instead I can say, well, on assignment A, that's what we talked about, because you still do need to work on basic organization. But on assignment B, where the chatbot generates the draft, it's already got a basic organization there. And we can think more creatively about things like word choice and argument and things like that. And I'm really curious to see whether that then speeds up the process of thinking about organization, because the student has a model of what organization looks like. It's a model that they're engaged with. And once they see that, hey, these deeper thought questions that I'm trying to revise to make the point rest on the organization to begin with, maybe they better understand what everyone's been telling them when they say, gosh, you don't have any organization to this paper. Your topic sentences don't help me understand how you're progressing through your argument. So I'm really curious about whether that part of my teaching will speed up, but I still think it's going to require every bit as much time to understand how we derive a demand curve, for instance, because ChatGPT doesn't know how to do that either. So,
No.
Well, that's pretty interesting because I wonder if it's going to affect the quality of writing as it feeds up, so, you have your elementary school teachers that are like, just wait till you get to middle school, and your middle school teachers are yelling at you about high school, and high school is yelling at you about college, and college is telling you, wait till you get to Amazon, you have to write one of these papers for Jeff Bezos. Like, you have to be able to do this. But I wonder if, the naysayers kind of immediately come out and say, like, well, writing's going to crash and no one's going to know how to write anymore. But
right.
the way that you're casting it is kind of like, well, maybe it's going to improve. Do we see that these kinds of tools could really affect our students' writing ability? And so as they're coming up to you, they're able, they're able to write more proficiently so that you can get to those deeper levels of thought.
Yeah,
process.
that's the question, right? I mean, we as Americans are fatter because we have cars. So clearly that's an example where we got a new technology. It allowed us to get where we wanted to go faster. And so we regressed on certain skills that we possessed in the past. So maybe ChatGPT is a car, and we get worse at drafting. We become overly dependent. And then we have all these conversations about how our writing is flaccid and needs to be beefed up, and we need to exercise our writing skills, just like we do with the conversation about obesity in America. But there are other tools like the personal computer, which I would argue has made writing better, has made thinking better. When I think about when I was in high school and composing essays, we had a very, very fancy tool where I could see 50 characters before it typed out. We got that when I was in high school. When I was in middle school, I was typing on the old-fashioned typewriter where, gosh, if you screwed up, you better fix it right now. And then, God forbid you wanted to actually change an idea in a paper. That meant you had to retype the whole thing. And, now we don't have to do that. And the technology, I think, has allowed me to grow more quickly as a writer because I can quickly just move this paragraph from there to there. And, oh, look, that's a different paper. It's going to require me to rewrite that paragraph and so on. But my hope is that ChatGPT is more like the latter than the former. But I think there is, we're still in its early times. So will people just forget how to draft, and then only a small subset of us will know how to draft? And when you get to truly novel things where the chatbot can't help you, then we've got increasing inequality because only some of us retain the ability to write. Now, I think those questions about what's the consequence for inequality are big and unknown at this point. I saw a CNN article where a realtor said, I can't imagine going back because I used to spend an hour writing a house description. And my first thought was, you spend an hour on that? I mean, it says 5 bedrooms, 3 baths. I mean, it's like a template. I can't believe that you've been spending an hour on that, and now it's 5 minutes. But while I can't believe that it took an hour, at some level I can, right? There are massive differences in writing ability. Strong writers probably could have banged that housing description out in 10 or 15 minutes, and now she has caught up in that dimension. So that gives you hope that maybe this is a great equalizer. But on the other hand, if everyone is banging out those housing descriptions now in 5 minutes, what are they doing with the additional time? And I just don't know that it won't be that the people who have greater preparation and skill on the front end won't find even better things to do. And then this becomes, the thing that frees everybody up, but some people are better able to use that extra energy. It allows them to, revise what the bot does. It allows them to do different tasks altogether. So whether this is something that is going to level the playing field or just massively steepen the gradient, I don't know that we know that yet. So I think there are a lot of these kinds of what will this mean for us that we're still grappling with. And it makes it exciting to think about, but also I can understand the fears that some people have.
I wonder, and I would open this up to, the other guys on the call, definitely, if the point that you were trying to make, while does it bridge the gap or widen the gap or sometimes both? I wonder if it depends on where you are, like in your spectrum, if you're a professional or if you're in school. So and hear me out for a second. If you're in school, I think sometimes it depends on who's facilitating your use of that tool. Are
Yeah.
they encouraging you to say, okay, you got it, let's move on? Or are they encouraging you to say, okay, this is step one. Now there's 5 to 20 more steps that I want you to do? Or I guess it depends on if you're a professional, like how am I using it? Did I wait to the last minute to write this paper that I had to do for my boss and holy crap, I can't get fired. So here you go. And this is good enough.
Right,
Or
right.
am I trying to get that promotion? And I've been working on this for 6 months. So I think it's a
Yeah.
little bit of the self motivation versus who's facilitating my use of this tool. And I think that's a little bit of what we still have now in education as well. So it might depend on who you are and then who you are working with as well. I said that the wrong way. I'm
That's
sorry.
interesting.
I know
Yeah.
I'm about a bunch of writers and I ended with a preposition. My fault.
I mean, I think that because of the fact that even with where it is today, it's one of the greatest force multipliers that we've seen in terms of tools. So naturally, something that's a force multiplier, the people who know how to use the tool,
Right.
you know what I mean? They're rocket ship, you know what I mean? They're through. So
Yep.
yes, it is going to stretch that, space in between people. But that doesn't mean that, the people who are getting it and learning how to use it are also, lifting up. And so, I mean, we
Yep.
can obviously have conversations about fairness and how to, do that. And that's not, necessarily the topic for today, but making sure that to Roz's point, that everybody gets to go. And that you have somebody in every building. I imagine there's going to need to be, now you have literacy coaches. There's going to need to be an AI coach. You know what I mean? Somebody who can come in. And I guess the other piece of it is that perhaps the tool, because ChatGPT, this is new to us. Perhaps the tool is going to do some of the work that we talked about in terms of organizing, where when somebody wants to, like it maps the pedagogical process so that somebody who needs to, it reads what somebody does and it knows, okay, this is what that person needs. And maybe pops up a little video with somebody that explains to them why this is what they needed. So that again, it becomes a more powerful tool for everybody. But it's always going to be the people who know how to use the tool the best are gonna go the furthest, the fastest.
I liked how you said, though, every building will need a person, right? It's not that every teacher needs to do the same thing. And I think we see that in writing instruction in general, that I think sometimes, so at Carleton, we practice writing across the curriculum. It's not just the English folks who assign papers and try to help students move along. And I think some of us outside the English department can be rightfully concerned because we don't have deep instruction in composition. But the reality is, I'm a middle-aged guy who's written a fair amount working with 18-year-olds who haven't written nearly as much. And while I don't necessarily have all the experience that my colleague George Cusack, who runs the writing program, has, I do have some things to offer. And I don't have to bring this student from 0 to 100. I just have to get them from where I found them to a little bit further down the line. And so I don't have to do everything. Not every instructor is going to have to think about how do you craft good GPT prompts. One person in the building maybe needs to, maybe more than one, but it doesn't have to be that everybody's teaching the same thing. And I think that's a great reminder that as we go into this new world, some of us are more and some of us are less comfortable with this or that aspect of AI. And we don't all have to be doing the same thing, and that's okay.
I agree. That was a brilliant thought about that AI coach, because you just need someone there that can help facilitate from point A to point B. And like you just said with the students, you don't need your student to go from 0 to 100. You need your student to go from 0 to 1. And once they see success at 1, they can start to work their way towards 2. And the same thing can go for teachers, is that we know, being in the industry, that we do get a little bit of groupthink. We're a very stressed community of people that are not welcoming towards, not necessarily welcoming towards the next new thing. You sit in your PD and you're sitting in the back of the room and you're like, oh no, not this. So it can be a little hard to take on that new information, but if you have someone there that can facilitate just a little increment of change at a time and say like, hey, did you know? And I've seen this in teacher groups, is that at first this came out and all the teachers were like, no, this destroys everything I can. And then somebody was like, did you know it can make quizzes? And everybody's like, wait, what? And they're like, did you know it helps you write your DBQs? And everyone's like, oh, wait, what? And so, it went from being that like that evil thing that's destroying everything you've ever made and that you love about your curriculum to, you don't have to create every list that's ever been generated anymore. Like, how cool is that? And when
Yeah.
you think about it, and we talked about this the first time we discussed it, is that we can talk about ethical boundaries in terms of using this, but what's cheating and what's innovation? And like, if you think that innovation is finding a quicker way to do the task, we kind of get these rigid ideals of what's allowable in which space. When you're a teacher, it's okay to grab the quiz that's off Google. When you're a kid, they're not allowed to grab the information that's off Google. There's a
Right.
different set of ethics for the two of them, but maybe we need to bring that together a little bit and say, like, if you can make the quiz with ChatGPT and the kids can hack it, then the kids can hack it because they're using a tool to get from point A to point B. And that's
So
kind of a step of innovation.
We might say that there are contexts where it's allowable and contexts where it isn't. So for instance, spell check helps me out a lot in Microsoft Word. I think that's okay. And I've never cited Microsoft spell check. Maybe I should at the bottom of all my papers.
Or Grammarly, it corrects my grammar all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if I were taking a spelling test, I think it would be inappropriate to, have Microsoft Word fired up and be like, oh, well, that's how you spell squirrel. So, I think context matters. And I think there are learning objectives, like, for instance, when learning how to draft an essay, where it would be inappropriate then for the student to use ChatGPT to do that which we're trying to teach them to do. But, to some degree, I think about assignment design is all about the productive struggle, trying to identify where in the assignment do I want the student struggling and where do I not want them struggling. And, occasionally I'll give an assignment and I'll hear back from a reference librarian, for instance, your students are spending a lot of time on X. And I'll think, oh, no, I don't want them. I mean, I know you can't.
That wasn't the part.
That was not what I wanted them to do. I want to give them X. Feel free to that's not cheating for them to be given X. I want them to be struggling with Y. And I want them to have plenty of time to grapple over there. And so it's just another instance of, where do you want the productive struggle to be? If you want it to be right in the heart of what ChatGPT does, then I would suppose you want to be explicit about, no, this is not a time to use a text generator. But if that's not really your focus, then I think we should be open to the possibility that we want the time spent on some other part of the task.
It's definitely important to, I guess, picking your battles, but pick your goal. What do you pick the goals for the students where you want them to focus? Exactly. I think it's a great point.
Yeah. And that's just about scaffolding your assignments. It's really being mindful and purposeful with the time that you're spending on your assignments and making sure, I think, in the broadest view of this takes a lot of that busy work out. And so it's going to force us as educators to look at the assignments and say, like, what truly needs to be done here and not what's just not filling time. And that mentality maybe of time in seat is some of us have been pushing for a time in seat to slowly evolve its way out the door. And I think that this will definitely help it, because just doing tasks just to do tasks is not necessarily the best use of our students' time. It's having that purposeful work. And if that work is purposeful and the students are engaged in it, then there doesn't need to be, there's not that pull for cheating. And if we can make our assessments or just basic assignments so that they're using these tools purposefully, and we're showing kids how to build that skill and we're giving them the meaningfulness behind it, then I just think there's less want of cheating and less looking for the loopholes when the students know that their time is being respected and that the assignments are things that are actually pushing them forward in some way. I see this in class with my students a lot. When they explicitly know how they are refining a skill or building content, right, they're like, it's okay, I'll go to the moon and back. But when they get an assignment, when they're like, oh, you're just doing this because you don't know what to do today.
Yeah.
No one's doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And to Jamal's analogy to the literacy experts, I think we probably already do have, but we will certainly develop experts in AI who can then help us as educators figure out what is it that we should be trying to do with assignments. What is it that the chatbot can do for us? I've only just begun to play with ChatGPT. I think many of us have, but I've also come across videos of other people who clearly understand it a heck of a lot better than I do. It's like that teacher who tells you, hey, did you know you can make quizzes out of this? But so if we have ChatGPT experts in the building, like Jamal imagines, they can in part be thinking about working directly with students, but also professional development with staff to figure out, how do I focus this assignment? Maybe I use the text bot and maybe I don't. And what are the pros and the cons, and where will that put the productive struggle for the student?
It's more than imagination. It's going on my LinkedIn after this call. So
Jamal showed a TikTok of his daughter the way that she's using it in her classroom, I think broke our brains a little bit. So she's definitely putting it into practice immediately and just jumped right in. And the way, as I was going through, I'm like, going through her Instagram page, because I'm not cool enough to have TikTok. But it was extraordinary the way that she was applying it and the things that she's teaching her students, and the levels of analysis and evaluation that she's getting out of her students from reading a book. So they're reading a book and they're using ChatGPT. And so she's combining, the old mode with the new mode, and she's showing them how to bridge it together. So she's doing all of these skills all at the same time while teaching important content. And it's like, wow, like that's how you use time in the classroom. That's how you bring it all together.
At least right now, I think students find it exciting. Maybe it'll become just old hat before too long. But right now, I think you can engage.
They'll be over it before us.
Yeah, I think you can engage students right now in interesting conversations about what is good writing, what makes it good. Why is this paragraph clunky? This paragraph, the chatbot, what's wrong with this paragraph? I think students are right now very engageable on those kinds of deeper discussions about writing, where in the past they might have thought, oh my gosh, it's a boring conversation. I asked ChatGPT to write. Well, first it was a love note to my wife. That did pretty well. I promised my wife I would never send anything that was bot generated. And then it was a love poem. That was a little bit less effective. It was a little corny. And then my wife said, make it more intellectual. Can it do that? And I said, sure. And it did. That was awful. I don't know. It was like a parody of itself. So there's some things that it does poorly, but then I think there are interesting questions then that students can get excited about, like, why is that so bad? I mean, it's actually kind of challenging to figure out, how do you articulate why that is bad? It seems to be satisfying the assignment, but man, if you sent that to, a significant other, it would flop. So I think students might now, with assignments like you're describing with Jamal's daughter, I think they're going to be open to thinking more about writing. And at least for now, we should tap into that for sure.
Absolutely.
And I've kind of had a similar experience. I'm not a writer by nature, and especially don't like to draft a first draft, an SFD. So I started playing with it, and then I started looking at, well, write this as if you were a third grader, as if you were an eighth grader, as if you were a professor. And I ended up just playing with language, writing, reading. And I'm like, wow, this is kind of like a science lab, but for reading and writing. And what if our students are this engaged that they're in a reading and writing playground instead of playing Minecraft or on YouTube or, other things? And that was pretty exciting to me, that this could be, and that they could do it. Yeah, you could Google different types of writing styles and compare them. But when you do it in ChatGPT, you have more agency. It's more your thoughts and ideas and topics to pull the content from. And I thought that was really cool, that if it's adults, we're engaged with it, that there's a good chance that students, if kind of pointed in the right direction, maybe that coach at the school level is, helping generate these ideas of how to engage the kids with this. I think it's pretty exciting and could open up a whole new, it could create more writers because they're engaged with it. Just as if, kids didn't have science labs to get into, but now there are virtual science experiments they can do. They can play with the science. There may be more STEM and more science and engineers, scientists and engineers. I think it's really exciting that possibility that this may be opening up from, oh, nobody reads and writes anymore, it's all video. Well, a lot of people are reading, and hundreds of millions of people are in ChatGPT right now, reading and writing, and there's no video. It's really kind of exciting.
Yeah, and it reminds me of what you're describing there, of an assignment that I heard one of my English colleagues did that I thought, wow, that's a great assignment. So the assignment, this was a literature class. It was American poetry. Students are to write a poem in the voice of, so Robert Frost. And he said, some students pretty quickly figure out how to do that. It's a pretty sophisticated task. He said with the students who struggle, what he would say is, okay, start with a Frost poem, write what Frost wrote, but leave out one word. And now you replace the word. And then do another line and leave out a word and you replace the word. And then eventually you're taking out two words and so on. It's a little bit like, the task you were asking it to do, write it as if a third grader, as if an eighth grader. It's going to generate some voice. If you're trying to understand how to write like that voice, then you're revising it. You're taking a word out and putting in a word of your own, or it's a phrase out, or then it's a paragraph. And pretty soon you've figured out how to write something similar to ChatGPT, which, ChatGPT isn't a wonderful writer, but it's like a low level good, maybe a little bit less than that, depending on the assignment writer. It's not bad. And as a starting point for many students, if they could use the process to slowly substitute, they're just going to slowly substitute out some of the content that was generated with their own, they might find that they've learned how to write more effectively through that process, just like my colleague was doing with poetry, which would be very hard for me to do.
I think that's awesome. And I just think I'm sorry, Jamal, it's just the agency, like JW just brought up, it's the agency, and it's that it's personalized. And so it's all the things that we kind of talk about that like factory education kind of misses out on, is that like, you're not just saying, I need to figure out what different tones of writing are. You're saying, look at the different tones in my writing, or look at, and you're asking it, why is Mars so hot? And you could Google that, yeah, but it's going to give you some roundabout generic, it's not going to answer your question. And so what it's doing, and when you really look at it as a tool, is it's teaching you how to ask questions, which I could go on endlessly about asking questions. It's giving you agency because you're doing the inputs, you're refining the work yourself. It's motivating you. So it's like all of these pieces of a personalized education that you're not able to deliver when you're one teacher with 30 students, but that students could, when they have the free time, like JW said, like we could go in and just start manipulating it, and then it's feeding it back, and then you're having this communication with this chatbot that could enable all of these different things that you guys have all brought up. I think it's just so brilliant, and it's refining those skills that we really need our students to be working on. Is not how do you Google, but how do you refine? How do you ask questions? How do you stumble upon the seed? Like that's that part. I'm sorry, Jamal.
No worries. I was just saying that for me, it's I do both. I do some where I put in a little bit and listen and then revive what it says, but I also put in like long form writing of things that I already wrote, and say, make it a little bit more inspirational, and find me a couple of quotes that relate to it. And I need a joke to make it funny, and give it to me at the level of students, so that I'm making sure that I'm delivering this in a way that's going to be easy for them. So it's not just it's a reciprocal, circular kind of communication where I'm both putting in and it's giving me, more, or vice versa. So it really, like, the more you start prompting it really is a powerful tool. And I continue to look forward to where it expands. I can't wait to get my Bing, where it has the actual
yeah. And I started complimenting mine on your advice, and I'm like, oh, that's so wonderful. Can we write it again like this? Because I'm trying to prompt it for like things about agile and education. There's just not enough information. So it gives me the same paragraph back constantly. So it's not like we said, it's not creating new things. Sorry, Tori. Nice seeing you. But so like I'm looking at it and saying like, okay, so how am I going to complement it, and then see if it could stretch and see if we can gather new information and things like that, because the things that I'm writing about, there's not enough information about. So I find that really interesting, is that I get the same paragraph rewritten 15 different times from different prompts just because there's not that kind of information out there.
So the interesting thing about what you're saying though is that because with the blogs that you're writing about, your experiences with agile and education in your classroom, your information is going to be what's fueling ChatGPT, right?
And that's scary because I'm not that great of a writer. Somebody's got to help me. I need a
That part
tutor.
I don't know though. I actually I have been curious about whether that is, I mean, because they say they're going to use this is why it's free because we're the product. How is it going to determine that what you're talking about versus
Right.
so I'm not sure what they're doing with that.
It's like early 2000s Wikipedia. We're all just winging it and hoping it's okay.
Yep. I wonder if it's going to be that kind of thing where it kind of like gets smarter and then some people weed it out a little bit better than they did Wikipedia, but it's probably going to be something like that. Yeah. Interesting. Well, we are at our time box. Before we close out, I want to make sure that no one else on the call has any like final comments or questions, anything like that. Oh wow, silence like in the classroom. Um, well, we just want to make sure that we say thank you so much to Professor Grawe for joining with us, definitely sharing your insights from beyond K-12. And just again, another robust conversation about AI and ChatGPT. Thank you, as always, Jamal, for sharing what you guys are doing as well. You and your daughter, y'all are amazing. And just really helping us to dig in deeper about what we can do, not to be afraid of it, definitely, and different ways that we can use it in the room. Jessica.
Yeah, thank you for joining. Thank you, Professor God. That was amazing insight, especially because you're not an English professor, and we have so many English English teachers have taken over this conversation. So it's really nice to hear from outside of that box and how you're teaching economics with this kind of technology, and the way that you're stretching it and seeing it in your classroom is so interesting. Please come back and visit again and join in our conversation. When we don't have guests, we just have large conversations where everyone jumps in and we share ideas and kind of build off each other. So you're always welcome. And thank you, Jamal and Janet and Tori and JW, who is already here. But thank you guys for coming and spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it. And we always appreciate your time.
If you enjoyed this conversation, we'd love for you to be a part of the next one. Please join us on the next Agile Teachers Lounge.